Welcome to the For the Love of the Game podcast, the fourth installment in our podcast with your hosts, Jefferson Belfort and Brian Hernandez. How you doing, Brian?
I am doing great. We actually have some basketball. Now, is it regular season basketball? No, but preseason is the next best thing we can have. I'm so excited to get into it today. And things couldn't be better right now.
I couldn't agree more. The topics we have lined up for today's podcast are starting off with the GM surveys that came through early this week, some preseason performances and some players that we thought stood out in that, and then how does the Eastern Conference rank? And where does the Celtics fit in that? Are you ready?
I am so ready.
All right. So
you want to go?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
No.
Yeah, we'll take it right from the top. There was a lot of interesting stuff that was on this GM survey. As you guys know, each year they survey all 32 teams, their GMs, and they provide answers on who they believe are going to be MVP, champions, etc. Right? But there's a few we went ahead and start having a conversation with. So, what better place to start with than the MVP race?
Yes.
Do you have any opinions on that already, Brian?
Yeah. So, I think this one's actually pretty interesting. So, the numbers are GMs rated number 1, Kevin Durant at 37%. Number 2 with Luka Doncic with 33%. Number 3, Giannis at 13. 4 is Joel Embiid. And then list goes on. What I did find notable, no reigning MVP on there, Nikola Jokic. He wasn't even on there.
Another notable name.
Yeah. he wasn't even on there. And it's very surprising to see that this is the way they're going. Like he didn't receive any votes. What do you think about Jokic?
Before we even get into Jokic,
okay. Yes.
Gotta say, I did say there's another notable name not on there.
Yes.
But LeBron James was left off as well. So
yes,
we'll see what that does to motivate him in this season. But Jokic not getting in on the votes kind of is surprising, being that he was the reigning MVP. I don't know if that means that they think he's going to trail off. I don't think that's probably the most accurate thing to say,
yes.
but it is very interesting to see a reigning MVP not on the list.
Right, that's the thing. He's not even because like you're saying, I can see him not winning it this year, sure. But you have Steph Curry at number 6 with 3% of the vote. And James Harden actually and Embiid are tied at number 4 with 7% each. I can see, it's funny too. I want to get your input on this, but I could see very easily that Jokic would have more votes over than a player like James Harden if James Harden would go off. Because if you think about it, James Harden should have more help than Jokic. And James Harden is probably going to put not as much numbers because he has all this help. And just think about pure impact. That's generally what we see from the MVP voting. Who had the most impact for their team? James Harden, in my opinion, wouldn't be as high as someone like a Jokic for the Nuggets.
Yeah, no, another thing that I would say on this list, and I'm a Nets fan, but I'm going to say it straightforward.
Yeah.
I don't like KD as number 1 on this list because you got to keep in mind the last couple of years, what we've seen with history, with injuries. I think that will derail from some vote getters giving it to Kevin Durant. Another thing that I wanted to keep in mind as well too is, like you said, sharing the wealth, so to speak. with three other individuals. At this moment, it's just two, but sharing the wealth between two of those guys, I don't know how you choose him to be MVP out of that. And then it leads me right into what I've been saying for a few years is there has to be a real criteria that's built around the MVP race because it's so subjective. Like
Yes.
it usually follows a narrative. It seems like each year, and the narrative for the last couple years now seems like they're trying to pull Luca into that top list or top of the list, right? And I don't know if I would even have Luca in my mind up top of Steph Curry in the MVP race, at least at this point, ahead of Giannis, Embiid coming off of his amazing year. And even there, I consider like thinking about like Embiid with the impending doom that's coming from the Simmons situation. I guess if he's able to have a stellar season despite all of that, I think I would move him even higher up this list. I would be as far pressed to say two at this moment. And then Giannis rounds it up with three. And then I would pull up, honestly, Steph Curry to one.
Steph Curry to 1.
Yeah.
That's I like that. I actually, so thinking about where I would list everyone, I don't even think, I think I would leave probably Steph Curry like around number 6. So why do you say Steph Curry number 1?
I say Steph Curry just because coming into this season, once again, like I said, it is a narrative driven
Right.
award. After the last two lackluster seasons, if Steph Curry is able to put them in a top three position in the West, coming off of the offseason that the Lakers just had, the Clippers still have the firepower that they have, missing out on Clay for a good chunk of the year. He shouldn't. I think Clay's scheduled to come back around Christmas time. So if he's able to power them into a top three position, um, with all of those odds against them, I wouldn't be far pressed with putting him that high up. And then how efficient he was last year. He's notorious for being efficient, right?
Yeah.
But like last season was almost, um, I would say, glaring how good him being on the court and him being off the court was for the
Yes.
Warriors, and it propelled them into a play-in situation. Granted, they didn't get to go into the full-on playoffs, but for him to do that with what they had on their team last year already, and they were already talks of him being MVP with just that
Yeah.
type of performance, it just speaks to me that he would be on top of there. And then I don't want to forget about Nika, but I would pull him up around four. He would be in my mind to be one of those finalists in that sense.
Yeah. I actually, I think you turned me around more on the Curry situation. I think what we need to see is like the big reason why he wasn't higher last year, or even really, I guess maybe you can put a number 3 or like a 4. I forget what he finished on the MVP voting, but it's a big knock on him would just be that look where his team finished. They finished as a play-in team. So depending on how well his team does this year, which looking at his roster should be way better, uh, I could definitely see him being pretty high up there. I'm thinking, so I actually probably would have also, it all depends on where these teams actually finish, but I think I would have Luca like around 3 or 4, just because of how we've seen already just how dominant this guy can be and is. Even with his not so great team, he just does everything himself. And if he shows some improvement, and if some people around him also show improvement, similar to like a Steph Curry situation, if he can bring them to a 4 seed at least, I think Doncic would be pretty high up. I think he could finish like top 3 or 4. Um, and I think, like you were saying, this award is more of a media narrative. So although Kevin Durant, I think most people would agree, is at least top 2 right now, I would have him number 1 as best player in the NBA. But best player in the NBA doesn't always correlate to MVP winner. So I can definitely see him not winning it. So it's kind of surprising to see him all the way at the top. And like I say, Luka number 2. So, and then even just like Giannis, the reigning champion, and we saw how much of a switch and that's how dominant he was in the playoffs. And he's won this award 2 other times already, correct? Yeah, it's surprising to still see him at 13%. So
Yeah.
very, very interesting award. And like you mentioned, LeBron. I think at this point, most people kind of are, a lot of the people in the media and just going further, they already see like LeBron had his reign. He's still a very like a top 10 NBA player, but I think his time, maybe I'm wrong, we'll see this year, but I think his time as an MVP considerate and being like considered for this award, I don't think he's gonna be there because now you have these younger guys coming in.
Agreed. Well, that leads us into our next one, the breakout season. Player will most likely to have a breakout season. First, we have Jaren Jackson sitting at 17%, Anthony Edwards at 13%, MPJ at 10%, Darius Garland at 7%, Keldon Johnson at 7%, John Morant, interesting, at 7%, and then Kevin Porter Jr. at 7%. I'll go first thing I'll say.
Yes.
Why's your John Morant on that list? Because I think he's already broken out since his first season in the league. So that's interesting. But there was a few other people that cracked the list that got some votes that made me go like, huh. And one of those people that I was thinking of, and I would have had him high on this list, is DeAndre Ayton.
Yes. I agree.
Reason why I would say DeAndre Ayton is coming off of that finals loss. It's definitely going to reinvigorate him. His career still being around Chris Paul. That's going to be another reason. And then that contract. Everyone knows there's nothing that motivates you more than a contract year. And there's been conversations about them having extension talks, and it's stale a little bit for the beginning of the season. So a player like that typically comes into the season with some real fire and a purpose to play. But one person that's not on this list that I thought and I think should be in this list is my dear friend, Cam Reddish. I've mentioned him in previous pods before that I think that this will be a year for him to grow his game and excel. And we'll mention in the preseason side of it performances a little bit more into what I'm seeing already with him this year. But I think that he's the perfect prototype of like a wing player. He may not be the best defender, but he has the frame of body to, excel at this level of basketball, to score. I would love to see him become three levels type of player where he could take the long ball, bring it in mid range, but also go right to the hole. I would love to see that growth in his game, and if he continues to grow that in his game, I don't know why he would be left out in this list. You know,
Yeah.
um, another individual that I did like on this list, and it's another person we mentioned on this podcast, is MPJ. I think this is the year that he shows people that, especially with that extension he just got, that that was not a fluke. This is the player you're going to be expecting, and like I said on the previous pod, is that the Nuggets made the right decision in giving him the money early, so that when we get priced out, or the CBA comes around, that it looks like you got him for a steal at that price.
Yeah. Uh, I like that. I like that a lot. I thought, to go back what you brought about Cam Reddish, I think that is actually very that's a very sneaky guy that is expected to have a pretty big year. And like you said, we're going to talk about it more during preseason section, but already we're seeing some really good stuff. Um, I like the Michael Porter Jr. so far. He's I guess he's proven me wrong. My thing is always kind of like I I think we all know Michael Porter Jr. is a very good player. The health is the only problem. So
Yeah.
I think that's the only problem. But like, you can definitely see him. I think he does deserve to be on this list. Like you mentioned, though, I think some of these GMs just kind of don't know what a breakout player is, or I mean, like you're saying, like this is all subjective and all this, but like I don't know. Some of these GMs, we have to have some conversations with them because, like you mentioned, John Morant should not be on this list. He's already known to be one of the top up and coming point guards and all that. You have SGA, Shea Gilgeous Alexander. This man just got his giant contract, and like we've all seen what he can do when he's playing, especially the year that he played with Chris Paul. He's kind of already broken out. You have Karl Anthony Towns got some votes. Karl Anthony Towns, this man, I don't understand how this man can receive votes. This man's been an all-star and like all this stuff. This man has been great since he came into the league. And then Zion too, like Zion got votes. Zion's been like 30 point, like easily 30-point games and stuff like that. His problem is generally health. I thought those were pretty funny seeing on there. What I do actually agree with their number one vote in Jaren Jackson Jr. I think if just by watching Jaren Jackson Jr. his past couple of years, he's actually been a very good player. The only problem is we haven't gotten to see too much of him, mainly because of injuries. He hasn't been healthy enough to sustain like a long playing time and get better and get momentum. So if he can't stay healthy this year, which he's coming into camp healthy and all that, I think we can see a very big year and a big jump with Jaren Jackson Jr. And I think the rest of this list is pretty decent. I think Lonzo Ball is a very interesting one. New situation. He signed somewhere where he wants to be. He's going to be training with Zach LaVine every day. I think Lonzo I would actually have higher on this list than some of these other guys. And yeah. Do you have anything you want to touch on before we move on?
I saw this earlier today. I I don't want to say it before I remember the exact player that it was, but I think it was Jaren Jackson, where they mentioned that he got votes for this for the breakout. Oh no, it was Terrence Mann.
Yes, Terrence Mann did.
Terrence Mann got votes for this, and a direct quote that he said is, "You said the GMs, the ones that didn't draft me, 48th pick. I don't care about that." Like he said something else. I'm not gonna say that, but he said, "I don't care about that." So, it's interesting to see that like the players kind of, they probably see this, but they don't really care about
Yes.
what's being said about them before the season by these GMs, because GMs, like anyone else, make mistakes. So
Yes.
it is interesting.
It's actually pretty funny that you brought that up because a lot of names, because I'm a Knicks fan, that I see like a lot of Knicks fans on Twitter, and a lot of Knicks fans were going kind of crazy over this list because a lot of Knicks players that they're hoping for were taken off this list, or were not even put on this list, didn't receive any votes. And they actually asked RJ Barrett about this, and just going off the top of my head, he said something very similar, like, yeah, these GMs that never played basketball before, and like, I'm supposed to care what they think, and man, who even cares about this list? Like, stuff like that he was talking about. So exactly what you're saying, multiple NBA players kind of agree, like, this like, they don't care too much what GMs think, but GMs are the ones that are running the teams. So
Yeah,
it's very interesting to see that dynamic.
yeah. It's literally something they just brush off, it seems
Yeah.
like, the players.
But
But,
yeah, yeah.
that leads us into the next category, which is which team will be most improved in 2021. First on that list is the Chicago Bulls at 27%, the Golden State Warriors at 13%, sharing that with the Los Angeles Lakers. The Charlotte Hornets at 10%, the New Orleans Pelicans at 7%, and also sharing that with the Toronto Raptors. Some other teams that got some votes were the Dallas Mavs, the Rockets, the Grizzlies, the Heat, the Timberwolves, the Kings, and the Wizards. What do you think about that list?
So Chicago, I'm just looking at, like, Chicago number one. As we see, a lot of people are actually very high on them. I personally am not as much. I do think they're going to be an improvement this year just by looking at, who they signed. My thing is more just like thinking about, they kind of threw all their chips in, and yet we're still not like, are they actually a contender? Like, you guys went all in on a middle of the road team. Like, they are going to be better than last year. The record last year was 31-41. So
Mhm.
I can definitely see them being improved. Um, Most improved, I'm not sure. Golden State, I think, is actually probably one of the better picks because just looking at how much they improved their roster this offseason, who they're having coming back in Klay Thompson, um, and having a second year of James Wiseman, I think, and especially like they were a playing team last year, and I think this year they're expected to actually contend with the title. So I
Yeah.
actually would have Golden State number one.
Okay. As for me, I will tell you, and all puns intended, I am very bullish about the Bulls.
Okay.
So, um, I not in the sense that they're going to be a top three team,
Yeah.
but from what they've been the last couple of years, not really making it to the playoffs, kind of been in no man's land the last couple of years. For them, granted, like you said, they pushed all the pieces to the middle of the table, right?
Hmm.
But I think that it's refreshing for them and their fans to even compete for a playoff
Oh,
position
for sure.
at this year. So we could see them, in my mind, in my estimates, as high as like something as 5, as low as something as 10. Which, granted, doesn't sound too great, but for what the organization's been the last couple of years, I think they would like to see something like that, or at least remotely put a good product, a relatively good product out there for their fans. Um, and like I said, we'll allude to them in the preseason also, as they were
Yes.
another team that had like a good start to their preseason.
Hmm.
Um, with teams like the Warriors, the Lakers, uh, even Charlotte, they're all teams that were in the playoffs. So I don't like
Hmm.
putting teams like that on this list. I actually had a few teams that I thought that received votes that I think should have moved up higher. Or in my mind, I think the Wizards should be a little bit higher on this list. It is a lesser talked about situation with what they did in the offseason. Bringing in a point guard like Spencer Dinwiddie to shore up that point guard depth, where you have a guy that could play that pick and roll game that they were already doing with Russ last year, younger body than Russ,
Mhm.
speedy player as well, and brings a lot of emotion to the game. I do like that aspect of bringing in Spencer Dinwiddie, bringing in also guys like KCP to bring in some more bona fide shooters. Also bringing in, and I see it, I see you lost focus, Brian,
Yeah, I'm trying to
but
fix my focus for the video people.
but bringing in a guy like KCP also into the team, Montrez to shoot to shore up some of that defense with some of the. Granted, he's still small for his position, but I think he helps out with them playing a little bit more small ball. Bring in Rory into the game, have him at like the 5, have Rory at the 4. Denny Adva, I believe I said it right.
Abdia. Abdia.
Avdia.
Mhm.
Um, it finally gets that opportunity to play his role and potentially a starting role on the team is another thing that I'm interested about seeing them grow their game. And then putting it all together is how does Bradley Beal play and maximize all of their games is one reason why I think they're going to be improved. And I could see them vying for a playoff position, being that I think they were they were the eighth seed
They
last
yeah,
year.
they were eighth
So they
last year.
were, but I think they could be right there. They could slide up a little bit more, but the way how they played last year, it led you to believe that they were lower than an eighth seed. So
Yes.
I think they could get more wins, so to speak, in this season than they did last year.
Yeah,
Um,
last year, at least to touch on the Wizards, because like they started off very slow, and then to the end, that's when they started to have the win streak. I know was it Scott Brooks, I believe their coaches. He won like
mm,
Coach of the Month for one of the last months. So like you're saying, they are an improved team, but this is where it's actually very difficult. Of yes, they improved, but also so did everyone else in the East. So
yeah.
that's where it's like, are they gonna maybe I would say their highest I can actually see them making it in the East is going from 8th seed to potentially 7th seed. Like you're saying, I agree with all your points. It's just that does that make them higher than everyone else who also improved this offseason?
And then that leads us next into best overall moves. Um,
Yes.
what is your thoughts on those? Oh wait, actually, let me go over them. Let me pull them up.
Yes.
That list is consisting of one Miami Heat with 47% of the vote, Los Angeles Lakers with 17% of the vote, Brooklyn Nets on a three-way tie with the Rockets and the Wizards at 7%, and some other teams that caught some votes were the Bulls, the Knicks, the OKC, the Suns, and Trailblazers.
So I would actually say they're I don't I'm actually not mad at this list.
Mm,
Looking at it like first glance, Miami, I think with the Kyle Lowry signing, that was very huge. I think everyone expected that, but like that's a huge upgrade for them. Re-signing Duncan Robinson to that specific contract. I think he's getting around 20 mil a year or so. I actually think that's a very good contract. Lock him down. Um, I like all the moves that they made over there. I guess the bigger surprise would be that more people or more GMs actually aren't higher on the Lakers, because the Lakers probably did some of the craziest moves this all season, and yet still 47% of the GMs voted Miami over them.
yeah, and I think we made mention of this a couple podcasts back where we discussed along the lines of like where the Lakers were and where the Nets were with some of their moves for this offseason, and how we thought that. Honestly, I thought those were going to be the top two on this
Yes.
list. Granted, I do like what some of what the Heat did this summer, but I
Hmm.
still do think that based off of what the Nets and the Heat were and the Lakers were able to do this summer overall takes precedent over what the Heat are going to do, because it's still in my mind that the Heat are still a fringe
Yes.
championship contender, you know? And how much did that move them from where they were before? Granted, you would say the same thing about the Nets and the Lakers. They didn't really move from being contenders. They're still just contenders, but
Yep.
there's no more up you can go when you're already a championship contender,
Yeah.
you know? But what they did to bolster their teams, I think were far more significant on addressing what were issues in the last year going over to this year than what the Heat did. The Heat brought in some great talent, bring in PJ, bring in Lowry. You know, there's more names to add on to
Yep.
who the Heat brought in this summer. But when I look at position players that made sense that the Lakers and the Nets needed, they make a lot more sense than bring in Kyle Lowry and he's gonna now bring the Heat to the level of a championship contender. Another thing too that like kind of is interesting to me that they're on this list, but they're not on the other list is like the Bulls. Like how
Yes.
are the Bulls going to be the most improved team on one list over, and then they weren't one of them the teams that had the best overall moves. There's some inconsistency with the
Hmm.
voting, obviously, in that sense. But I don't hate it. I just have red flags around those a few things.
I wonder actually how much thought these GMs actually put into these polls. Is it like something that's like sitting in front of their desk? They have plenty of days to actually think about and take seriously. Is it you just ask them the question and it's their first thought that comes into mind, and maybe they're missing somebody they didn't recognize? I really wonder, because what it sounds like or looking at these lists, what it looks like to me is just this is kind of like off the cuff. Who do you think made the best offseason move? And they just have to go like, oh, Miami. Because like you're saying, and I think I brought up in one of the previous podcasts, I thought the Nets actually had one of the sneakiest offseason moves. So it's seeing them like number or 7% of the votes here kind of makes sense to me, because at first glance, you already, like you mentioned, the Nets are kind of already at the top. No one's really expecting them to get that much better. They're already the favorites. But what the moves that they did this offseason really solidified them as the number one team, the team to knock off. And in my opinion, no one else is actually really that close.
Great. All right, and that leads us to our last topic on this one
Yes.
is the best head coach in the NBA. Um, Sitting at number one is Eric Spoelstra with 55% of the vote. Monte Williams with 17% of the vote. Quinn Snyder at 14. Greg Popovich at 10%. And then Mike Budenholzer at 3% of the vote.
Yes.
Honestly, Brian, I want to lead off with this one. It's so funny how perception and recency biasness
Hmm.
can change the whole outlook of a coach. Mike Budenholzer was literally seconds away from
Yeah.
being fired as the Milwaukee Bucks coach, but now he's regarded as a top 5 coach in the
Yes.
NBA. Granted, I do think he is one of those top coaches in the league. But the perception of where he was and what was going to happen, the narrative before the playoffs started is if they had a lackluster playoff, Mike Budenholzer was gone. Didn't matter if it happened in the Eastern Conference Finals. Didn't matter if it happened in the second round. Didn't matter if you lost in the finals. He was going to be fired if he lost this year.
Yes.
And I give him this is with all of that fire under him and knowing it was there to win a championship. That is kudos to you on that one. But it's just interesting to see that he's cracked this list after that.
Yeah, I'm the one that actually wanted to bring up this topic because one, Mike Budenholzer, like you're mentioning, so close to get fired. Like, I want to know who's the GM that said Mike Budenholzer, because that's ridiculous. Because especially they have to give, I assume, one name. And the one name they gave over Eric Spoelstra, Monty Williams, Quinn Snyder, Greg Popovich, they said, Mike Budenholzer? Are you kidding me? That's absurd. And then the biggest reason why I want to talk about this is, all right, you say Mike Budenholzer, but you didn't say Tom Thibodeau, especially, which I understand. Would I give him number one? No. But like I said, like all these guys aren't actually, as we see, Eric Spoelstra 55%, sure. But also there was another category that who's the head coach that has the best defensive scheme. But then so the GMs actually saw that and they voted Tom Thibodeau at 37%, number one. And yet they don't even put him there. They put Mike Budenholzer. And I just kind of wanted to say, like, Tom Thibodeau in the past, he got a bad rap for overplaying his players and all that. But man, what he did this last year with the Knicks, and he was the coach of the year last year. He won that award. The fact that he didn't even get a vote is pretty crazy to me. But like, especially to squeeze out everything from a garbage roster, a roster that had literally nothing, to squeeze out the 4th seed in the East, that's extremely impressive. I'm just more surprised that Mike Budenholzer got a vote. Even though, yeah, the man won the championship, I don't think he should have been on this list. As you said, this man was about to get fired. He was literally seconds from getting fired. That's ridiculous.
And you know what? Since you said that, I didn't even notice that. Yeah. But I agree. Yeah, he should have been one of these top 5 coaches on this list. Another thing I wanted to say too is I love Eric Spoelstra. I do agree. Maybe he should stay at number 1, right? Yeah. But I think that Eric Spoelstra is still being praised for what he did in that 2020 finals run and maximizing Miami for what they had. And dually, I don't think that made sense for saying that for this year. If this is based off of, if it's strictly based off of season, I would say I wouldn't have him at 50. I wouldn't put him that high, is what I would say. Second, if it's based off of trajectory, okay, then that makes sense. You know, if you're talking about with standing as being a coach, what he could do with his upcoming future, I agree. And maximizing it, right? But if you're talking frame of work, why is Greg Popovich so low then? Yes. You know, like I understand he's not the same Greg Popovich we saw for over 20 years, a few years back. But if it was, the criteria was frame of work, there's no way you're building something out saying best coaches and leaving Greg Popovich, in my mind, at 4.
Yeah, no, that's it is very interesting. I do agree with your point of Eric Spoelstra, definitely top 5 coach in the NBA. But to be voted at 55%, that we looked at all these all these categories that we talked about here, I don't think anyone else had a 55% percentage. Yeah, no. I think the highest was 37, 17, 27. And then yeah, Eric Spoelstra got a 55% of the vote. Like that's extremely dominant. And like you're saying, Greg Popovich and even Monty Williams and all these guys, maybe they should be higher. But yeah, just some interesting stuff. Do you want to move on to the preseason? And what are first impressions, some of the breakout players and all that?
Yeah, let's get right into it. A few performances that I wanted to headline with and discuss. Um, the Bulls came to play against the
Yes.
Cavs a few days ago. It was good to finally see what that would look like with their team.
Hmm.
Zach LaVine was leading the way with 25 points, 3 rebounds, 3 assists, and 3 steals. Another breakout player that I saw, John Morant, and only 87 points and a pulled fire alarm, had
Yeah.
27 points, 6 rebounds, and 4 assists. And then another player that I think that we should spend some time discussing today is Jordan Poole. I'm trying to pull the stat line of what he had. Okay, I have it now. Is he had 30 points,
Hmm.
5 rebounds, 5 assists, 7 3 pointers, 7 of 14.
Yes. In 22
So
minutes.
yes, the man was on fire, and
Yes.
honestly, he's looking more and more like that bona fide third option to when Clay comes back, and that second option while Clay is not around. You know, more and more as the days pass, I think his confidence is just growing as a player, and I'm loving to see that because the guy is showing his proficiency in the sense of being an on-ball player and off-ball player, and that's what you need on a team like the Warriors, especially when you have a guy like Draymond constantly looking and
Hmm.
finding the right players to give it to. Um, yeah, those were some of the performances that I was loving
Yeah.
from the preseason.
Yeah, I definitely think so. Anyone that's out there that likes fantasy basketball, definitely Jordan Poole is a guy to keep your eye on. This guy is gonna be a bucket. I think yeah, his second game I have his stats. He didn't shoot as well as his first game, which is kind of impossible because his first game this man was on fire. But still, he shot. He had 17 points in 22 minutes, which is still very impressive. I think he wasn't as hot from 3 pointer. I think he was like 1 for 6 at three, but still to have 17 points there, this man is showing out this year. I think, although yes, this is preseason, I think he's definitely somebody to look out for, and even just like you mentioned, just to fill the role of Clay when he's gone. To even if he plays on the bench when Clay's back, bolster their bench. Warriors, one of their weak spots has always been their bench. So having someone like Jordan Poole, if you want to start him, maybe play some more time with the second unit, that is huge. Another player, at least on the Warriors, that I saw that is actually going to be pretty helpful for them, Otto Porter Jr. coming off the bench. I think he was playing like 17 minutes a game. He was like 18 points, like 15 points. Like that's going to be huge for them. Um, what I think, oh yeah, one of my guys that I had, you're gonna love. I always bring him up during these kind of conversations. Cam Thomas, that man, that man is a bucket. So, when I saw him in the summer league, I was like, this kid. I've always known this kid is going to be able to score, but I'm like, all right, summer league, I see it. It's to be expected, but still, he was going off. And then just to see him, watching him in that first game, how comfortable he was, how just smooth his jumper is. Oh man, that kid is something else. What do you think
It's the
about?
confidence.
Yeah.
It's the confidence that he plays with
Oh yeah.
that impresses me about him. We mentioned it early on, like in the I believe it was our first our first episode, or our test episode
Yes.
that we mentioned it, where we said this guy just has like that confidence that not a lot of GMs, even in the league when he was coming out of
Oh yeah.
draft, loved. It came off as cockiness, right? But he said something after the game where he alluded to that people were saying like when you get to the NBA, like you're not going to be able to score. Like, are you going to need to learn how to score better or something
Mhm.
along those lines? He said, if you could score, you could score. And it's the truth. At least with him, it's the
Yes.
truth. Is that the guy can find his way to a bucket, and I don't think that that's a problem, especially as we now see this growing uncertainty of what's happening with Kyrie, which means that we're going to lean on the depth when this season starts because we just don't know what to expect with this Kyrie situation, right?
Yep.
And if anything, what a blessing in disguise for this guy, if that's the case. Which you don't want to see that Kyrie doesn't play, right? But for him to get an opportunity to potentially play with greats like Kevin Durant and James Harden and learn from them and grow his game off of them, and still, like you said, there was one play where I think he lost control of the ball against
Mhm.
Anthony Davis, and then he drained the shot on a buzzer beater um, right in front of his man, and that was cold. The guy's cold.
Yes. Yeah, it's that confidence. That's what's so impressive. And uh not saying he is this player, but a player that coming out his rookie year also had that same type of confidence is Damian Lillard. Like that guy, as a rookie, I've watched interviews of him. He's like, give me the last shot. I want to take the last shot. I want to do this. This man, he would play against Kobe. He mentioned of like after the game, I think he went like he had a nice head to head battle with Kobe, and after the game, Kobe was like he came up to him, he's like nice game, and Damian Lillard at the time was like, man, don't talk to me, you guys just beat us, and like that was his in his head at the time. Like he's such a competitor, and his confidence is like, yo, we should have beat you guys, but then he said after the game, he's like, yo, Kobe just did that to me, like that's kind of crazy. But like in that moment, like you just have that supreme confidence, even and you don't see that with a lot of rookies. And a lot of times to bring it to something that I know very well is something like the Knicks. Of you have a player like Kevin Knox. This man was drafted very high, but his downfall. This man has so much talent. This man has all the length and athleticism that you need. But his problem is just straight confidence. This man is not a confident player. You can see it when he plays, and if you don't have that confidence, that kills you. And Cam Thomas has it, and I'm very impressed by him.
Yep.
I would say another player I had that I was actually pretty impressed by is Malik Monk for the Lakers. This man, so he was also, I believe, in that draft with Kevin Knox and all these other guys, and I was actually very high on him coming into the NBA. But then, like watching him his first couple years, like he wasn't really doing much. He kind of seemed very childish. But watching him this season and the way he's playing, it seemed like he put a lot of work in the offseason. And he is very serious this year. And it seems like he's matured a lot just by watching him during these games. And very impressed by him. Uh, he's improved his 3-point shooting a lot. Just even looking at his previous years, I had his numbers of in 2019. He went from a 28% 3-point shooter to a 40% 3-point shooter, and just overall, I think that's actually probably one of the sneakiest acquisitions this offseason as well for the Lakers. Do you have any other players you want to talk about, or at least you want to touch on anything?
I alluded to him earlier in the podcast is Cam Reddish. Cam
Ooh.
Reddish was coming off of a 20 points, 20 points, 3 rebounds, 5 steal game. Um, he felt comfortable. He looked comfortable
Yes.
playing his game with the Hawks. That was something that last year I saw when they were trying to do that, or they were getting to a point where he was starting to get comfortable or
Hmm.
feel comfortable offense. Unfortunately, he got injured, and then it derailed that. And then you have Hunter. He comes back. He's vying with time with Hunter, and he never really regained that confidence. I think this year will be the year he'll be able to first be able to because it's interesting because he's not going to be the guy carrying the ball, right?
Yeah.
But he's going to pick the spots and he's going to know which moments to get his shot off. If he's able to understand his role on the team and how the team is ascending as a young core, he could really have a breakout year in my mind. But
Yeah.
um, he has to remain knowing what his role is in this
Yes.
team.
I think something I actually saw that's very interesting. It was either like one of his coaches or like a previous coach or someone. They were talking about. They were saying that they're trying to get Cam Reddish back to who he was before, and similar to how he's playing or how one of his past teammates played in RJ Barrett, of a player that has short-term memory. If you miss a three-pointer, you're not caring that you just missed a three-pointer. You're going to go back the next possession. If you're wide open, you take the shot. And that's something that, Cam Reddish kind of had that very smooth, cool, like persona. And what it seems like, it's something that kind of stuck with him of like, you're missing shots and everything. You're going to be a little more hesitant next time, but they're instilling that back to him. And as you see, it's really helping him. And I think like a very similar player that this happens to is Ben Simmons. Of this man, he doesn't want to look bad. He doesn't want to take the shot that he knows he's probably going to miss, even though it does help his team to take a wide open three. It's not his best shot. It's not his bread and butter. So he's going to move away from it. But as you see with Cam Reddish, they're really drilling that into him. And I can see him having a huge breakout year this season if he gets to play in time, if he stays healthy.
Agreed. Another thing that I wanted to bring to light about that as well is more along the lines of when you look at the construction of that team. I'm loving what I'm seeing from the Hawks. I think they're gonna have a repeat performance of what they had last year.
Oh yeah.
Nate McMillan was mentioning how he had to help Trey channel in this offseason, um, so to speak. The direct quote I don't have, so I'm not saying it verbatim, but he was mentioning that Trey is much like a sports car. You can't drive it in every terrain, right? But you got to learn how you can utilize this car, right? So he said that was something that was present in MJ's game when he
Mhm.
first came to the league, was trying to figure that out and realize that you can't go in one speed the whole drive,
Yeah.
right? The whole game. So it was funny to hear first the MJ comparison in that sense, but I don't think it was a direct comparison he was trying to
Yeah.
give. But to allude to it is true. I do think that we did see Trey, especially in the playoffs, give it his all, but sometimes to a fault where he could have made players around him a little bit better and got a little bit more out of the guys that were around him in the playoffs. And granted, I still think that he did a pretty good job doing that last year. But if he is able to figure that out even better and fine tune it to a way where he knows how to do that, every given game that he's playing, the Hawks will be a deadly team for the future.
Yeah. It it pains me. It pains me to see the Hawks doing so well, but I mean it's just the truth. The Hawks are gonna they didn't do too much this offseason in terms of acquisitions and all that, but honestly, they didn't need to. All they
Yeah.
really need, because I mean, look at them. Last year, they were a younger team. Just each player needs to work on their game, get a little bit better, have a second year all playing together, and I think they're a very scary team, and I like that quote about being able to know how to use a sports car and when to use it. That's pretty cool. Some rapid fire guys, not as high in the list of like breakout, but some pretty notable stuff that I saw. I thought it was pretty interesting of watching the Sixers game of Andre Drummond. Now this man's career was going pretty down the toilet. It wasn't looking good, but surprisingly, he actually looked very dominant his first preseason game. He had 19 points and 14 rebounds in 24 minutes, and it's obvious he's not gonna play a ton of minutes behind Embiid. But what I think is notable about this is we all know most likely Embiid is not gonna play every single game. He generally misses around 20 games or so a season, and in those 20 games or so, they're not gonna have to take as much of like their foot off the pedal because they don't have Embiid. You have a very kind of similar player in Andre Drummond that can take that role, so they wouldn't have that much of a downgrade. Um, Stop me if you want to jump in any of these. Real quick on Scotty Barnes, I thought he had a pretty impressive first game. 13 points, 9 rebounds, 6 assists, 2 steals, 2 blocks in 24 minutes. This kid, what he's going to do, he's going to do it all. He's going to hustle, he's going to do everything. And as we saw from his first game, it's impressive to see what these rookies can do in actual NBA minutes, even though, it is preseason, but the talent is there. And we see that. Another guy, Tyler Hero. Tyler Hero, I'm not the biggest fan of Tyler Hero because I am an RJ Barrett fan, and they have a lot of fans like to compare the two, and they go back and forth and all that. So I feel some type of way about Tyler Hero, but I have to say, watching this man, he looked like last year he did not look good. I don't think he looked good at all. But watching him in his first preseason game, he looked very comfortable. His dribble looked very, very sturdy and fluid, and doing pull-up shots and all that. He had 26 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists in 26 minutes. Pretty legit. I think that's going to be huge. Another guy. It pains me that he's not on the Knicks. Trey Murphy, the third of the New Orleans Pelicans. This man. His first game, he had 21 points, 6 rebounds. He shot 6 for 10 from the three-point line. His second game, 20 points, 6 rebounds, 6 and 9 from the three-point line. This man is showing he's a sniper already. This man is already a beast on defense. As a rookie to do this, just looking at the numbers, this man is showing. Brandon Ingram, step aside.
I was actually going to add another rookie, and he was on our list of controversial picks, but the guy came to play and he looked really nice, throwing dimes all across the court. Josh Giddey, he had 18 points, 7 rebounds, 3 assists on an 8 of 12 shooting night. The guy looks like the real deal, honestly. I did like to see his game, but then it goes back to what we were mentioning in that first episode, is where does Shea and him fit in together, that you have a guy, a point guard like that is going to need the ball or should have the ball, and you're going to have Shea, who not necessarily has to be a point guard, but his game does speak to being a point guard. He could play that combo guard situation, but is he willing to give the ball up to let Josh be the one that brings it up and play off of him?
Yeah, I think, well, in our first or episode 0 that we did, I compared him to LaMelo Ball. And in a similar situation of like LaMelo, you don't want Terry Rozier picking up the ball and dribbling up the floor. You want LaMelo doing this. You want that. And in this situation, like you're mentioning, it's very tough. I do want the ball in Shea's hand, but we see some magic can happen with Josh Giddey. And already in his first game, he's showing his one swing skill, the skill that everyone was like he needs to improve. He didn't have a 3-point shot. And already his first game, he was 2 for 4. That's all you need to do. Man, this kid, pretty impressive. There's a reason why the Thunder reached pretty high to grab him.
Yep. And then another rookie is Buck Knight. He's poured
Yep.
out 20 points on 7 of 14 shooting. And that's all the guys I have on my end.
Yeah, Book Night, I thought I remember that episode 0, I was also saying I wasn't very high on him, but I have to say I was impressed. I want to see more, but first glance, 20 points as a rookie, like rookies that are doing this in their first preseason games, very impressive to me. Another guy, Emmanuel Quickly 2.0 for the Nuggets, Bones Highland. This man plays the same exact way. They do the same thing. They're actually really good friends and they train together a lot. But for his first game, 19 points in 24 minutes. Second game, 11 points, 3 rebounds, 6 assists in 24 minutes. That as a rookie, this kid coming off the bench for Denver, like Denver doesn't need more depth. Like, come on, this team is already so good, and now they have another good piece. That's impressive. And I think that is the last person. Yeah, that is the last person I had on my list. Do you want to move on to our last topic?
I am ready for it if you're ready for it.
Yes. So the last topic is looking at the Eastern Conference. And we mentioned it a couple times in this episode earlier where the East got better. Everyone in the East got better. This isn't the same thing as last year where, you have a couple good teams and then it drops off. Pretty much I can say like 1 to 10 is very competitive. And which is exciting because what is it? 7 to 10 is the playing team. So that's going to be pretty fun this year. And I'm hearing a lot of different lists from media people, and what I constantly see on these lists is the Boston Celtics. People rate them very, very high. And some people are saying number like they're probably going to be the 3 seed, maybe anywhere from 3 to 6 is where I generally see them. And I wanted to get your first impressions. What do you think of the Boston Celtics and how do you think they're going to finish?
Yeah, so I'm of the mindset that I didn't see enough in this all season that made me think that they've lifted themselves above of above of the likes of the teams that they were having issues with getting seeding against, right? You have the Heat that have gotten better. Yes, they've brought in some players that have gotten them better as well too. Bringing in Schroeder, bringing in um uh I'm trying to remember who else that they brought in over the off season.
So I have a
Um,
list of all the moves that they made. So first, new head coach, no more Brad Stevens. Brad Stevens was their poster child for a while, and then last season it blew up. So he's the GM now. You have Ime Udoka on the team, which I actually wanted to get your feedback on. He was an assistant coach for the Nets. How do you think he
and he
fits as
comes
the head
from the
coach?
he comes from the Spurs family
Yes.
as well, right? So I like that for them, right? The coach decision, right?
Yeah.
But I think that if you have a fundamental issue, which was Brad Steven at the head coach, is he had some frictions with some players. Well, how was that really addressed? There was no real resolution in that situation. You just move them up into the front office doesn't really address it in my mind. So
Yeah.
I think there's still going to be some lingering issues that come from that. Yes, I love the Ima Duka like move to move him into the coaching seat, right? But like I said, those teams that they were contending against got better.
Yeah.
The Sixers, I think, are going to slide down. Still think they're better than the
Yeah.
Celtics. You had the Heat, they got better. You got the Knicks, they got better. You have the Hawks. They didn't really get to put much onto the team,
But
but
they
I
should be
still
better.
perceive
Yeah.
them as a better team. And then they didn't address the biggest issue. Getting an older Al Horford does not address the
Yes.
issue that was the persisting issue for almost the last 3 years now is shoring up that front court depth. And that's still the problem. What
Yeah.
what did he's not
So
going to be real resolution
Yeah.
to this problem.
So the moves that they did, they traded Kemba Walker and a 2021 first round pick and a 2025 second round pick for Al Horford, and who wasn't actually very healthy last season. Similar situation. You have Kemba Walker who's sitting out back to backs. Al Horford at 35 years old, also sat out back to backs last season. In that trade, you got back Moses Brown, who they then moved on for Josh Richardson. You signed Ennis Cantor, 29-year-old guy, to a 1 year, $2.7 million contract. They re-signed Marcus Smart, gave him an extension, 4 years, 76 mil, which I actually think is a pretty fair contract for him. You got Dennis Schroeder to a 1 year, $5.9 million contract, and you lose Evan Fournier. Those are the moves that they made.
I don't love them. I don't love them. I really do not love those moves. Let's put it as this. Let's go over the teams that are going to contend with them at that spot, what key additions they made, and let's talk about where they stack compared to...
I apologize to cut you off real quick. They also added Juancho Hernan-Gomez. I forgot to add him, but I don't want any Celtics fans out there to be mad that I forgot somebody.
It's crazy that you forgot him, because that actually just makes him a title contender. But in all seriousness, I'm looking at like what the Knicks key additions were, right? Yep. They bring in Kemba Walker. They bring in Evan Fournier, who is a player that just left that Celtics team.
Both right? Just left. You know, it's pretty funny though. A fun fact: Evan Fournier and Kemba Walker was actually one of their best lineups, or like two-way lineup or two-man duos that they had on their team last year. So they lost that.
And that's, well, there you go. And then you look at the Heat. And I'm going to tell you exactly what the NBA.com power ranking says of key additions right here. The Heat brought in the thickness with Kyle Lowry and PJ Tucker. I kid you not. I did not make that up. If you go on NBA.com on power rankings for the East, it says thickness. And then it has in parentheses Kyle Lowry and PJ Tucker. And then they brought in Markieff Morris. That already sounds like a better, right up there with the Celtics offseason, right? You bring up the Sixers really didn't get that much better, but what I say to that is that they still have an MVP candidate in Joel Embiid. Then you look at the Hawks. Once again, they didn't bring in anyone either, but they have an insane young core. And then let's go even higher, because you said top three, right? Yep. You bring up the Bucks. Are they really going to contend with the Bucks at this point? Bucks key additions were Grayson Allen, George Hill, and Semi Ojeleye, another Celtic right there. Yeah. But granted, those aren't amazing like pickups, but still, they're the reigning champions for a reason.
They were already better than them to begin with.
Exactly, and then there's no reason to even discuss the Brooklyn Nets at this point.
Yeah.
So you look at all of those teams ahead of them from last year. And they all, in my mind, still and perception-wise, are better than them. And then you now bring up a team, just to slide one more team in there. You bring up the Bulls that some people feel really, really good about this year, and some people a little iffy on them, right? But they bring in Lonzo Ball, they bring in DeMar DeRozan, and they bring in Alex Caruso. Time will only tell how good they get, but I think that's exactly where the Celtics are, is vying with them. Jason Tatum, obviously, a once in a generation type talent. So I wouldn't shy away that, but there's only so much he could do with that team.
Yeah, that I think that's the biggest thing of Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. We all know these two guys are very good, And the only way they can ever be that high as top of third seed or even anywhere else, from 4 to maybe 4 and 5, if they wanted to be there, Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum have to take major steps up, because looking at the rest of their team, they kind of did not improve. They didn't really do that much. And yet I see everyone going crazy about what the Celtics did. And it's confusing. Like we talk about, the head coach, I love the pickup, but also he's a first year head coach. It should be interesting to see what they have, what's going to happen there. I hope the best there. But you sign Enes Kanter, who they had already. They let him go for a reason, and this man is 29 years old. He should be in his prime, and yet he's every year signing 1-year contracts. He just signed $2.7 million contract. Anyone else could have had Enes Kanter, and they decided not to. Like I mentioned, Al Horford, a lot of injury problems with him. Dennis Schroeder, another guy where kind of anybody could have had him. And he's been regressing. He's been regressing since he played with Chris Paul. And as we saw when he played with Chris Paul, he looked amazing. But last year with LeBron and all these other guys, he wasn't the greatest. And as it's kind of comparable of what you had with Kemba Walker, now you have with Dennis Schroeder. There's something you can say to there, but I'll just leave it as that. It's kind of comparable. Not the greatest. The man is not a good 3-point shooter. Last season he shot 33%. That's not going to help with their spacing. I like you keeping Marcus Smart, but that doesn't really do much. And it's just like, I don't understand of how they were last season and how they're going to get better. And especially like we mentioned, when everyone else got better. That's where I am with the Celtics. I see them as high as potentially 5. I think that's the highest they go, and potentially dropping to 8. I think that's their range.
I agree. I really don't think there's much contention on that because, like, I think we're on the same page with that.
Yeah.
It's going to be a hard team to, you know, we could be wrong.
Yeah,
Like,
we definitely could.
we really could be wrong, right? But based off of what I saw in the off season, I think for them to do what anyone thinks that they're going to do to get to third, you're seeing an MVP year out of Tatum this year. That's what you're seeing.
Yep.
That's honestly because I just generally don't see them taking that jump into that far up, you know, into the standings, you know.
Yeah. My problem, I would say, with the Bulls is kind of their bench. It's very tough and it's very light, because looking at their starting lineup, you have Lonzo, DeMar DeRozan, Zach LaVine, Nikola Vucevic, and Patrick Williams. That starting five, very good. I actually think that's a great starting five. As you mentioned before, like looking at them their first preseason game, I think they're going to be a fun team. They were running up and down the court, a lot of fast break stuff, a lot of dunks. Zach LaVine looked very good. That's impressive. But you look at their bench. Who's playing their bench? Tony Bradley. You got Alex Caruso, Kobe White, Stanley Johnson, and then like maybe Troy Brown Jr. That's your bench. Like, not the greatest. That's just where I am at them. And like I mentioned, they pushed all their chips in. They're all in. And it's just like, I wonder, does Zach LaVine see that? Because there's some holdup with him not signing that extension right away.
Yeah, and you know what? Honestly, I've been thinking about this the last couple days about what I thought about the team and what they remind me of. And honestly, they remind me of that 2012, 2013 Brooklyn Nets team when they first just made the jump over
Yeah,
to Brooklyn, where you have Lonzo in that Darren Williams like situation where he's a decent player. Like he definitely is a player that's granted, Darren Williams at a time was thought of as one of the top point guards in the league, but
yeah,
I think they're in a similar role, like of what they're doing in the league at this point in their careers, in his career,
mhm,
for Lonzo, right? Um, then you have also Joe Johnson fits right into the mold of you have. Um, what you have, you just said his name. I just slipped my mind again. Zach Levine,
guys. Yeah,
fitting right in there, and DeMar DeRozan. I wouldn't say because he's not as defensive as this player, but you have Gerald Wallace that was playing that three position, but just the way how like that starting five is comprised, it
yeah,
just it strikes me as like a similar team like where it is top heavy on like leaning on those five
mhm.
guys. And then Vucevic is the spitting image of what Brook Lopez was at that time, right? So you now look towards that bench, like you said. What is that going to look like? I love the Caruso pickup.
Very good, very good.
Definitely a good six man coming off the bench, but it's only time could tell what this team's truly going to be.
Sure.
But like I said, they were at the point where they needed to put something together so Zach Levine would at least remain interested in the team, and then the fans also would be able to have something to root on. Um, Granted, I don't think that's the best way to rebuild. Obviously, it's not. But it also is. There's some teams that are resigned with the fact of they'll they'll live with a couple years of mediocrity, then really address it and restart.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I think they had to do something. Do I love all the moves that they did? No, but I think they still are going to be a fun team to watch. This is still so early, so maybe they make some moves later on. Maybe they are better than we actually are think right now. So that is to be seen. Real quick before we end, I've been holding this in this whole time, but Jeff, I gotta tell you, I'm ready to jump out the window for these Knicks. From what I saw, I'm always a very pessimistic Knicks fan, or I try to be optimistic. I try to be like, look on the bright side, but I'm also very realistic with them. But man,
Hmm.
from the one preseason game I saw, a single tear came out, man. I was from what I saw. So as a Knicks fan, every single time I'm watching a game, I'm like, damn, bro, these guys suck. No one can shoot. No one can do this. The spacing is terrible. And then I watch a Nets game, and then I watch a Warriors game, and my mind is blown. I'm like, whoa, this is what spacing looks like. This is what looks like when all your players can shoot. This is a flowing offense. You guys just aren't sitting at the 3-point line, passing the ball back and forth, waiting 24 seconds. It blew my mind watching these Knicks and having every single player being able to shoot a three and having space on the floor. I died for half a second. I was so happy. Now, are they going to be amazing? No. But like we mentioned, a lot of improvement from what I saw. Kemba Walker, this man had the biggest smile on his face the entire time he was playing. Now, he didn't have the greatest shooting night. Not everyone had the greatest shooting night, but every single starter, for the first time that I've seen, that every single starter scored double digits. This is groundbreaking for the Knicks. And just even having from last year, from them being the fourth seed, having the worst starting point guard, probably what is considered the most important position in the NBA, to having probably our best point guard since Raymond Fountain, Stephon Marbury. It's mind-blowing how terrible these Knicks point guards have been. Maybe their best point guard since Jeremy Lin for those 10 games that Linsanity happened. Most people kind of forget. That only happened for like 10 games. It was not good. And then he was terrible in the playoffs against the Heat. There's so much there. This team brings some joy to my heart. Like I said, I'm ready to jump out the window for them. I'm ready. I'm ready for the season.
And I will say, it does pay to have a real floor general. That's what Kemba is.
Yep.
I would say, just wait for the playoffs before you delve out all of your praise for Kemba. But granted, during the season, I think Kemba is going to ride the ship, and honestly, I think that he's going to get the Knicks closer to a 50-win season than they go the other way towards like 40. I think they'll be closer to that 50 wins with having Kemba on the team.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, like we've been saying this whole entire podcast, the East has gotten stronger. But if you look at it, the Knicks last season, I believe they had 42, 44 wins, and that was with 10 less games. Their team got better. You don't have Reggie Bullock, who's just shooting threes and can't dribble the ball and can't do anything. And Elfrid Payton, who sits in the corner and you have to play 5-on-4. It is so bad. It's just like, it's just mind blowing. Like I was saying, that I can see how a actual free flowing spaced offense actually looks like. And like you mentioned, I don't actually have too much expectations going into the playoffs, but I just want to see them get there. And I think it is very likely that we see the Knicks in the playoffs. Whew, I had to get that off my chest. I've been holding it in this whole time. So before we head off, do you have anything else you would like to say?
I think that I got everything on this podcast today. I'm happy with how the preseason is starting. Things are a little shaky in Nets world over here, but I'm happy to see all around the league, seeing these young players really define their game and figure out their games at this moment. I think we're in for a really great year all around. Both conferences. Can't wait till we find that real surprise team this season that leads to being a conversation piece for this podcast later on into the season. But as for everything else, I think that's it. That's it on my end.
Yeah, so I love what you said about the Nets because it is a very interesting time, but we mentioned earlier, they have so many pieces that, God forbid anything ever did happen, you guys are still, in my opinion, the clear favorites. So that is going to be an interesting storyline to see what happens. We saw already Andrew Wiggins, he got his vaccine and he's able to play now, all of that. But yeah, I thought this was a fun one. I'm really excited. We got some basketball. It's preseason, but we're so close to the regular season. It's going to be a good time.
Definitely will.
All right, so that's the end of episode 4.